Loss Clinic, because it works.
Oh, you've no idea. You have no conception how bad it is.
When it comes to buying carpets for your new home, you must visit Dream Carpets. Years of experience selling to contractors has made Dream Carpets the leader in new home installations.
They can get away with it because it is not...
Change the topic. I've signed for another year.
Eh?
I've signed another year. So Trudeau can't retire for until the spring of 80.
Dream Carpets, 815 Terminal Avenue, where builders buy.
BCTV, we're giving it all we got.
Good morning. I'll give you dollars to donuts that Premier Bill Bennett is sitting in his office in Victoria rubbing his hands with glee at the self-destruction of organised labour in British Columbia. And why is he doing that? Because he's preparing amendments to the Labour Code. And dear old Monroe and Gruntman and Sloan and Cuby are making it dead easy for Bennett to bring in amendments to the Labour Code which will ban secondary picketing and reduce the strength of organised labour by about 50% in any major industrial dispute. Now, how is Bennett, that friend of the workers, able to do this? Because Art Cuby, Monroe, Gruntman, and the employers in the pulp industry don't know if they're coming or going. Let me spell it out to you quite simply. Monroe, on behalf of the IWA, signed a 3-year agreement with minimum increases, 0, 4, and 4.5, and no concessions. The pulp industry then goes to the CPU, which is dragging its feet because it wants to get one up on the IWA, and they won't look at a 3-year contract. And then to add insult to injury, the pulp employers say, we want to take away a statutory holiday. Now, for those people who don't live in British Columbia or understand our delicate nuances of the labour movement, let me explain that statutory holiday. The employers want an extra day's work in the continuous operation of pulp mills, and they are prepared to pay the normal going rate for that extra day's work. And you know what that extra day's work pay is. $705 a shift on the compressed work week. So here we have Gruntman saying, we're not going to give any concessions, right? And here we have the employers saying, we want that concession, we want the 3-year contract. The solution to it is the employers take away the additional stat. Gruntman will then probably go for a 3-year contract, and that dispute is over. But what's been happening now? I venture to suggest, you see, what's happening is that the CPU and the PPWC are doing legal secondary picketing on the common owners of all the plants from which they have been locked out. There are 10,000 of Jack Monroe's hungry workers locked out behind the other union picket lines on Vancouver Island alone. We know what's happened up north. The IWA in one major case has crossed the CPU picket lines and gone to work. Solidarity, like Operation Solidarity, is down the drain. And unless CPU and PPWC make a deal with the employers and the employers pull back the lockout, we are not only in for continuous union strife and backbiting, internecine warfare and raiding, which we've been away from for a while, but we are in for a severer blow, if you can imagine it, to a very hard-pressed economy. There's got to be 13,000 IWA guys who are desperate to cross picket lines. Monroe will not, and he'll never tell them to cross picket lines. But if this holds out much longer, who knows what will happen. And as I say, there's Bennett sitting on the throne in Victoria with these hundreds of millions of dollars tacked away in BC rail debt for the next election when the time comes, saying, boy, oh boy, I will now have the support of the hungry IWA workers and all the other strikers in the province affected by the lockout to ban secondary picketing, and the labour movement goes back 20 years and the gains it has made gradually over the past 20 years. Somebody's got to say it. This lockout has got to end. The IWA men have got to be able to go back to work. We can't afford this kind of strike right now, and it's no time for niceties. Cuby collapsed under solidarity, Art Cuby. Monroe's right on the cross right now. Daren't really open his mouth. Imagine Big Jack Monroe being frightened to open his mouth and tell the honest, blunt truth about the whole business. So it's up to the pulp industry and the CPU and the BC Fed and Monroe to knock their kind of dull heads together and get this solved. Well, that's my contribution to industrial harmony for the day. Now I'm going to tackle political harmony, and I've got the one senior Liberal cabinet minister who does not want to be Prime Minister if and when His Holiness the Prime Minister finally goes. Marc Lalond, that is, of course. And we want to try and get through some of the double talk that came out in what has been described as the budget for the rich. And later on as an antidote, we'll find how the Tories feel about certain aspects, including the defectors in Manitoba, on this dreadful caper over the official bilingualism for Manitoba. But first, Marc Lalond, Minister of Finance from that faraway city of Ottawa, after the break.
This budget is fiscally responsible. It is designed to provide leadership in moving beyond economic recovery to economic expansion.
I think it can be safely said without exaggeration that the Liberal government in Ottawa has been having a very bad time lately. It's been accused of wallowing in the mire of this and that, little PMO investigations, and even Mr. Lalond, who's had his share of trouble. You must have felt dreadful when you had to get up and apologize to Mulroney, of all people, on that business about looking through the correspondence.
Well, it's not that I felt dreadful. It's not the thing I had to do. I was mistaken. And, you know, if you're a man of honor, you recognize your mistakes and you apologize.
When you're wrong, you say so.
Absolutely.
I give you full measure.
And I have done that.
Full measure.
Well,
I want to ask you a little bit of gossip. Just a little bit of gossip. Did Mulroney, and this was not, it was the Prime Minister who made this statement in the House. I remember it well, but I couldn't find the clip this morning. Did he only pay $1 for his house from Iron Moor?
well, that's what the Gazette story is about. That's an old story going back a few months, and I have no reason that this is not true. It has never been denied.
Yeah, I know, but you see, when you sell a house in British Columbia, you sell your house for $1 and other valuable considerations which are not shown in the transfer deed. Is that not likely what happened in the province of Quebec, which may have a similar registry system to ours?
That is unlikely. You would do that when you have a transaction between two private individuals dealing at arm's length and who do not want to reveal the cost of the sale of the house. But when you get an employer doing this, for instance, to the company president, it is another way of providing a benefit to the president that does not take the form of a salary.
So you're
I have no reason to believe that it would not have been done for $1 indeed, period.
So you think that Iron Ore sold him his house for $1?
Yes, and that, as I said, would not be so surprising. What if it had been different? I'm sure Mr. Mulroney would have denied the Gazette story when it came out.
I'm very surprised by your answer, because I had presumed from my local knowledge that it was $1 and other valuable considerations.
Well,
nothing wrong with it, is there?
No. That, as I said, that happens quite often at arm's length transactions. Two people who do not know each other, you know. You sell your house to somebody, and he doesn't. You don't want to know how to let the public know how much it was sold for. You do it. But in a case of a company doing this for one of its senior officials, It's generally one way of giving a benefit that does not take the form of a salary, and it's a nice fringe benefit.
Be taxable, of course, anyway. If you get any benefit under the Income Tax Act, which is in fact a benefit, eventually it'll catch up with you one way or another.
Normally,
you must put a realistic valuation on the house.
Well, normally what you do is the income tax people give an estimated value for the rent that you should be paying on the house or something like that.
That's right.
But
talking about income tax, so you're not kind of embarrassed, I'm sure you must be, about some of the incredible disclosures about the revenuers. Fancy dinners for this, little quotas for that, little this and this, making the revenuers go beyond and above the call of duty to harass not the big swindlers, but the little people. Wasn't that not left a very bad taste in the mouths of decent, honest taxpayers, as most of us are?
Well, quite clearly there have been incidents occurring at particular places on different occasions that are not ones we are happy with, and this is why we have had an independent investigation started by an outstanding Canadian with a large
Price Waterhouse, was it?
Woods Gordon, I believe.
One of them.
And that particular gentleman is going to have that full investigation, and we're going to act on his recommendations. As a matter of fact, I have announced in my budget a number of changes that are going to ensure that the administration will be carried on in a better way.
And I'm going to come to the budget very shortly, because you have some dreamer, idealistic plans in your budget, which I want to ask you about, perhaps. But let's keep the politics for a moment, because you're a very straightforward man. And I'm a very reasonable, sane, and decent person. It certainly looks to me like the $300 million grant for jobs fund was a slush fund. Now, on the following basis, that the Liberal MPs had the edge at $500,000 constituency, that you got, according to some interpretations, 76% to Liberal constituencies. What do we get? A couple of billion given out by our excellent but non-elected senator, equal to 5% for British Columbia. Now, are you not taking brutal political advantage of monies available to perpetuate your regime?
Well, if you look at the total figures for employment creation in British Columbia, the money that the federal government spends for job creation, the Department of Manpower and Immigration, you arrive at a result where the amounts spent in British Columbia, where we do not have a single seat, corresponds practically exactly within 0.1% to the unemployment level. So I think I say you look at the record, not only of this or that particular program, take all the programs put together. The money spent on job creation in this province corresponds exactly, as I say, within 0.1% to the level of unemployment in this province.
Between 12 and 13% average unemployment here.
Absolutely.
But are you not evading me a little bit there? Does that not mean that the Liberal MPs who had access to the early applications for 500,000 got more than the level of unemployment in their constituencies?
It seems that they got more under this particular program, but they got less, much less on some other programs. We have programs, for instance, under Section 38 of the Unemployment Insurance Act, whereby the share going to British Columbia, for instance, has been much larger than in other provinces. And there again, it depends between MPs. There's one Conservative MP in Quebec, and he got his full share, and he applied, and he got it. And when asked about it by the press after, he said, well, I thought my other colleagues, he was asked, why didn't you mention it to your colleagues in caucus? And he said, I thought they were aware and they would have done their job like I did. Some MPs, some conservative MPs did their job and put in applications and whatnot, and a lot of others didn't.
You're saying that the reason they didn't get the $500,000 was not because an extra opportunity was given to Libs, but because they were lazy slobs?
Well, I can tell you that the one Conservative MP we have in Quebec put in applications and got money equivalent to the money given in other ridings.
Well,
I think the judgment, I leave you to make the judgment as to what the others did or didn't do.
Well, I've still left the clear impression that the Liberal MPs had the edge to get in their $500,000 quick before the Tories knew about the specific applications.
Well, if you divide, let's say, $300 million or $150 million by 500,000, that still leaves you $500,000 average for every single MP.
Budget next section. But meanwhile, let's have a word from your point of view as an eminent French Canadian who knows Quebec like the back of his hand. In fact, you were in charge of the Liberal machine at one time in Quebec, you know, political.
I'm still responsible
You still are the political machine in Quebec for the Liberal Party. how come I feel that you're using the defection of the Tories in Manitoba on the Official Languages Act, the refusal to appear in the House, as some kind of partisan shot, which, because of your House of Commons action and Mulroney's weakness with his 5 members, is going to further split the country? And I'm not taking the blame off Manitoba. Paulie deserves some accommodation. But I have a feeling you're going to use this as a new national divide the country issue if it suits you.
Well, to begin with, I have been out of Canada since Friday, and the only use I've seen of this has been in press reports that I have read. We didn't invent the story about their absence on Friday.
Oh, that happened.
It was there, and it was in all the press reports I have read on my way back. So it is not something that we have been pushing, and frankly, this Manitoba thing breaks my heart. I am just so sad about it. I can't even think of using it for partisan purposes. I'm just heartbroken, that's all.
Well, if I may ask one little question, which would be in the top of anybody's mind in British Columbia, even those who realize that this is an injustice in Manitoba, still somebody will phone me this morning and say, what about this no signs in English in Quebec? Why doesn't the House of Commons pass a resolution about that? Realizing the injustices in the past and all the rest of it. People get infuriated by what they regard as the inaction of the federal government to protect the decreasing English minority in Quebec on the basis if it's only of the signs.
Well, we have supported financially the cases that have been taken to the courts in Quebec systematically. We have provided funds for the Quebec minority in Quebec, and significant funds.
That should be corrected, shouldn't it?
It's a dumb, I mean, it's a stupid piece of legislation in Quebec. The question that arises is it within the constitutional power or jurisdiction of the province? And it does appear that it is. We'll see what the courts will say in the end, but up to now we have had no judgment to the effect that it was not within the jurisdiction, but it doesn't make it less bright as a piece of legislation. But the fact is that you have, in Manitoba, you had a different situation where the legitimate government of Manitoba and the federal government were in agreement, and the federal parliament were unanimously in agreement. And you had a situation where the opposition party literally prevented the parliamentary system from working and literally hijacked the operation of the democratic system in this country. And, you know, who started this kind of game? It was the Tory Conservatives a couple of years ago, as you remember.
Although it was the Tories who brought in the official bilingualism way back in 1870. Now, one last little question there. Therefore, to protect the English in Quebec, the language in Quebec, under attack as it is by l'évêque, a constitutional amendment may be necessary there too.
Well, but for this you would have to have another type of government in Quebec than the one we have, and this is what I've been working hard at, to achieve also.
Next, the budget with Marc Lalond after the break. Mr. Lalond, this is directly on your budget. Quiet there, please. Directly on your budget. Bennett has just slapped us an extra 8% on our personal income tax because he says he's been done out of money by you and health. We are now faced with an additional arbitrary, perhaps $50 per family by regulation to replace user fees because of the threats of Monique Bejan. Bluntly put, are you, as they say in their budget speech, not cheating, but doing British Columbia out of $364 million to bring your contribution to health to 50%?
Well, I have had a very short comment to the press when this came out, and I merely said that it was a lot of nonsense, and I don't hesitate to repeat it. We have never contributed province by province 50%. What has been the history is that we have contributed 50% of the national average. If some provinces have their costs are much higher than other provinces, that's their business. If they want to give the shop or don't want to keep their cost under control, either to doctors or for hospital administration. That's their decision. What we have been paying up to the change in 1977 was 50% of the national average. And with the change we've made, we are now giving to the provinces a block grant, which allows them to do whatever they want with it. But I can tell you that this year, 1984-85, the federal government will still be paying slightly over 50% of the hospital and medical care cost in this country. This is still the situation today.
In
Canada, as a national average. In British Columbia, what you have seen over the last few years is the highest medical fees of the country. They are, last year they were 25% above the national average in British Columbia. And in terms of a cost for medical care, they are way above the rest of the country also. So no surprise that Mr. Curtis can complain, I am not getting 50%. He's let his cost in the medical care and hospital care area go sky up compared to the average in the country. What we are doing, as I said, we are paying this year as an average across the country slightly over 50%.
So when he says that your contribution to federal share of health costs has dropped from 43 to 39%, does he well know that you only pay 50% of the average across the country and that his costs are out of line?
Well, he must know, because I think in his budget he mentioned himself that the medical fees are the highest in the country. I think he mentioned it himself somewhere in the budget.
Doctors, they've only gone from 300 million a year to nearly 700 million a year in a matter of 3 years.
Yeah, well,
doctors must be well paid in fee for service.
But that's, the provincial government has something to say about that, and they have let that happen, and that is their responsibility, and there's no point in trying to pass the buck. No. For 1984-85, this year, I will be adding $100 million over the basic transfer payments of last year for medical care and hospital insurance. $100 million. And how much is he going to add? $51 million.
Correct. So
that leaves him with $49 million in his back pocket that he can use whatever way he wants. And that is what he's going to get from us. $100 million more, and he's going to allocate only $51 million more to help.
And then in his new 8% from us, he's going to get 95 or $97 million more. And then he's going to nick us for $50 a head. But mind you, he's doing that because you say no user fees. You're determined to wipe out user fees, correct?
Yes.
Is it correct, therefore, that he can wipe out user fees by sharing it over all of the population with a family charge?
Well, this is what he's asked for.
You don't mind that?
And we will we will have technical discussions as to whether this can be technically achieved.
Are you prepared to collect that $50? He wants it down on the federal tax form.
Well, that will be a matter we will have to examine, because it's different from the traditional taxation arrangements we have with the provinces. We collect their income tax, but this would be a different thing, and I'm not sure that it can be worked out.
It would cost you money to collect that too, wouldn't it?
Well, it's some money to collect it, but that's not the point. It's whether it can be done practically and administratively. But the fact is that we are transferring, as I said, enough money to allow him to pay for the user fees without having to add this to the budget.
You're telling me that the extra $100 million he'll get his user fees only cost $40 million?
That's right.
Say that again, please.
This year, we are going to add $100 million to our transfers to British Columbia for health purposes. And the user fees, as you mentioned yourself, are in the area of around $40 million. So there is plenty of money there if he wants to use the federal increase in transfers to pay for that.
Is that what we can expect from a social credit government?
Seems so. It seems so, but I would have liked a little more candor about it all.
All right,
because really, it's a decision to increase taxes and then trying to blame it on somebody else. And frankly, when I have decided to increase my taxes last year, I didn't blame it on the provinces. I said I was going to do so, and I was ready to take the blame for it.
I anticipate that many hundreds of university staff are going to be laid off in British Columbia this spring, and fees are going up between 20 and 25% to all students, and I have no doubt that social credit has or will blame you for being chintzy in education costs. Could you give me a clear definition of what you or have done for education in BC this year?
Well, I can tell you that this year we are going to increase again our contribution to the provincial government for post-secondary education by $27 million, so $27 million more. Do you know how much BC, the social credit government, is going to decrease its contribution to post-secondary education? $27 million decrease. So there's again a $54 million spread between last year and this year. We increase our contribution to post-secondary education, and the provincial government has decided to decrease its contribution by an equivalent amount.
Well, why do you give them the $27 million if they're going to use it to cut $27 million off to reduce the historic debt on BC Rail?
Well, we have an agreement with them, and we will respect our agreement to contribute to the cost of post-secondary education on the basis of an escalation that is provided in the agreement. It is up to the people of British Columbia to try and convince their provincial government to use those funds and affect them in the area of post-secondary education. I think this is, of all the budget, I think this is probably the most deplorable aspect because, you know, this is no time to cut back on education in our country. We're going to face tough competition in the world. We will need young people who are well-trained, well-equipped, to ready to face the high technology era. And you don't do that if you're cutting back on your educational system. I find that this is a very deplorable trend, and I hope we will not see a continuation of that.
You want to see Ben Curtis about it while you're here? The Prime Minister of Curtis?
No, I have no plan to have any particular meeting.
More on the budget with Marc Lalond. I hope Doug Heal and the boys are taping this morning. Don't come looking for a copy of this interview later, after the break. Honest to goodness, Mr. Lalond, no kidding. Bulletin from Ottawa, Trudeau. CP. Trudeau will announce today he is stepping down after 16 years as leader of the Liberal Party, reliable sources said in this bulletin number 432. Come on, let me into the secret. Don't leave me with egg in my face. Is it true or is it not true?
Well, I can't give you that answer until it is either denied or confirmed from the Prime Minister's office.
There's a bit of a... Go on,
But, I don't know, you better wait for the rest of the day and see what happens.
I see a bit of a sparkle in your eyes. By the sparkle in his eyes, Marc Lalond seemed to indicate yes or no on the Trudeau's retirement. Back to the thing. You have a plan in your budget which caught the imagination of many Canadians, but is it practical? Portable pensions. Does this mean that if your scheme grew to fruition, that I could work a couple of years for Max Milk, a couple of years for 7-Eleven, move to Alberta, and take my employer's contribution and my pension with me?
Yes, fundamentally this is what we are aiming at. Obviously it will require the cooperation of the provinces because something like 80% of the private pension plans are under provincial responsibility. But I must say I have already had discussions with the Minister of Finance in Quebec and in Ontario. And the outlook is quite promising in that regard in those two provinces. So
for private employees of private firms?
You see, what we would provide for under the federally regulated schemes would be that if you work for an employer for 2 years, your pension becomes vested in, you don't lose it. After 2 years, you acquire a right to your pension. And then if you change employers, we will set up what we call a registered pension account So you have the choice of either leaving your money in the plan of your employer that you've left, and it will grow up as the time goes on, or you can remove it from that plan and put it in what is called a registered pension account, which will be administered by trust companies, insurance companies, etc. And it will follow you as you move from job to job, provided you stay at least 2 years in each jobs where you will acquire new pension rights.
It sounds great, but it's a dream.
Oh, no.
When are the provinces going to agree? Would you need a constitutional amendment?
No, we don't need a constitutional amendment. What we would need would be a cooperation from the provinces. And I would hope that, as I said, the large majority of the provinces are going to cooperate, because it is something that will be good for the economy, good for the workers, and will introduce more mobility for workers in our system, which is a good thing.
Have you, in effect, stopped any possibility of strikes in the public service by your double-barreled announcement that you're scrapping the 6 and 5, you expect them to negotiate sanely and properly, and if they strike, you'll bring in legislation? I was amazed there wasn't an outcry about that. Have I misinterpreted you?
No, I don't think you have, except to say that I have not said that we would legislate any strike back to work. There may be strikes taking place in the public sector which are not affecting the national interest, and you would have to let them run their course. But when I have indicated that if there are strikes that get prolonged and that are prejudicial to the national interest, we will not hesitate to ask Parliament to act. And I think that's the right course to follow. But otherwise, we will try and negotiate honestly and fairly and hard. But
you made it quite clear that in cases of important strikes or strikes of important services, you will say back to work.
Absolutely.
No screams from the National Unions of Public Service Employees?
I think they have recognized that the public will not support savage strikes in the public sector, and that the public will support any government that will take a tough stand if there are strikes prejudicial to the national interest. People want to see the government act and provide the leadership, and we will do so.
I liked best the comment by McDermott immediately after the budget that it was going to be a boom on Bay Street and a bust on Main Street. Let me pick out an action. You seem to be going for the wealthier middle classes when you increase over the next couple of years the RRSP contributions from 5,500 to 15,000 and make provisions too for people to put money they haven't put in previously into it. That doesn't affect the common Canadian. How many Canadians can put in 5,500, far less 15,000?
First of all, McDermott missed in the budget the fact that the first money that I am spending is going to spend on old age pensioners, single old age pensioners, 3/4 of whom are women, and on young people, another additional $150 million to the $1.1 billion we're going to spend on young people this year. So our first priority has to be to go to those young people and the elderly Canadians in need. But the fact is that I have put forward a plan whereby indeed the self-employed in this country, and these are not only the lawyers and the accountants and the doctors. It can be your grocery shop owner and your garage owner on the corner here and whatnot. Everybody who is self-employed or who doesn't have a pension scheme in his job from his employer. Anybody will have the same right to contributions, tax assistance for pension contributions, as is available at the present time if you're employed by somebody else. You may have in this station, for instance, the vice president of the station who gets the right to contribute up today, has a tax assistance under the employer-employee regime of up to $15,500. This is today if you're an employee of a corporation.
Didn't know that.
But if you're independent, you don't have that right. You don't have the same access. So what I have said is that we want in our society to put the same regime for everybody. That is, they have the same opportunity to access. But obviously, if I earn $20,000 a year, I won't put $15,000 in an RRSP. But the fact is that I will be able to accumulate what I'm
unused portion.
Unused portion. So if I'm making $20,000 today, but in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, I'm making $100,000, I'll be able to catch up. So it is a system to help those in our society who want to achieve, those who will be dynamic, and those who will want to improve their lot as time goes on.
I have a couple more questions on the budget, but we'll take some calls to Marc Lalond now too. For goodness sake, keep them short and sharp and to the point. I don't care how you put them, but put them shortly after the break.
We're concerned about the massive unemployment about there, close to 2 million Canadians who are in very desperate straits. What's in it for them? It'll go over big on Bay Street, it'll be a bust on Main Street.
The twinkle in Lalond's eyes reflected the facts. Coleman, Ralph Coleman, press secretary to Pierre Trudeau, said that the Prime Minister will resign as soon as the Liberal Party can select a new leader. That will be in May. It's...
Well, I'm not sure it will be in May.
When will the convention be?
The party will have to decide what is the most convenient time. I doubt they would be able to do it in May, but we'll see. I don't know that the party has made a decision as yet as when this will take place. I would think, or June, I would think, maybe even early July. Because of May, I don't think they would have time to get ready for a convention in May.
The House, under its new rules, does not sit in July or August.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, be the election in May or June.
The convention.
The convention in May or June. The Prime Minister, even if he's an outsider, will be de facto Prime Minister without having to face the House until after the election.
Well, until you know, until after the summer, if the convention takes place, let's say in early July, and the Prime Minister or the leader of the federal party, Liberal Party, would not be in the House, he would have. He would be Prime Minister until the election anyway, and he would not have to face the House if he decides to stay outside of the House until the election is called, and that will be up to that person to decide, whoever he or she is.
And that will be after the Pope's visit?
Well, depends on when one would want to call the election. If that person were to want to call the election immediately after the convention, it could take place before the Pope's visit.
Before or after? But it would be much better for a new leader to be seen in the presence of the Pope and all the pomp and circumstance, and then go to the people on an election. Will it be John Turner?
Phone me after the convention, I'll let you know.
You are not going to go for the leadership, is that correct?
Absolutely not.
You've said that before.
Oh yeah, that story does not change my mind.
Does not change your mind. Do you have a favorite candidate?
I'll want to find out who the candidates are first, and then I'll make up my mind, but at the present time, it's too early.
Must it be an English-speaking Canadian on this occasion?
If you say must, I would have to say no.
Should
for
it
instance, I think it would probably be, depending on the quality of the candidates, obviously, but assuming all the candidates had equal capacity, I think it would probably be preferable for our party in that case, assuming, as I said, equal competence and ability of the various candidates. But you know, you look in 1968, in the tradition of our party of alternating, one would have said, gee, it should have been a French Canadian, but in effect you had a lot of English-speaking Canadians as candidates for the leadership. That didn't prevent, you know, 7 or 8 of them to run for office. So I don't see that because we had Mr. Trudeau as Prime Minister and leader of our party in the last 16 years, that this should be, that should prevent any French-speaking Canadian from running for it if he wants to.
Anyway, the end of an era.
Well, I don't know that we can talk like this in politics because, you know, it's not like a play and it's over and the curtain comes down and you're starting with a whole new play. I think there's a lot more continuity in history than that. A lot has been achieved during that period. And I hope and I'm quite confident that we will continue to build upon what we have built upon in the last 16 years. When Mr. Trudeau came into office, you know, the Pearson era, we say, was concluded, but it was not changed from night and day. We built upon a lot of the things that Mr. Pearson had started.
What I'm saying to you, Mr. Lalond, this morning, is that Trudeau has a stamp and a mark of his own, which we haven't seen before. Yeah. Are we likely to see it again?
It will be a different style, I'm sure, and a different individual. Each leader has his own style and character. I've always admired in Trudeau his tremendous courage, his ability to see through difficult situations and take a stand, popular or unpopular as it could have been. And I think when history is written, he will be considered one of the great prime ministers we've had in this country. One only has to look at what he's done on his speech initiative in the last few months, and there were a lot of cynics around saying that it was done only for partisan purposes. But I hope that after all this, Canadians will look at their leaders in a less cynical view. There's a lot of cynicism that I find in Canada that I don't find in other countries vis-à-vis their leaders, and I don't think it depends on the leaders. It depends a lot on our press, our attitude vis-à-vis politicians generally. It's all right to have a good deal of skepticism and take everything with a grain of salt, and I accept that. But I think when you compare to initiatives taken by the American president, for instance, at various times, I think there is a greater readiness in the United States for the American people to support their president in initiatives he takes. But we'll see how Canada evolves.
One final question. Domestically, what would you regard one of his confidants and intimates, the man who's been at the right hand of Trudeau on many occasions, was his greatest single achievement?
Well, I think it has been to keep this country together in the last 16 years. In effect, I think the way it was going in Quebec in the 60s, if Trudeau had not come in there and took an extremely strong stand on the issue of Canadian unity, against separatism, on the issue of terrorism, this country might indeed have come a lot closer to a split than we did. I think that situation has been completely reversed, and we will owe a lot of credit to Mr. Trudeau in that regard.
Just watch me will be his epitaph. On the telephone, just to get the record dead on, although we've got everything on the go, is Lynn Robson's press assistant to the PM.
Yes, I am here.
What was the exact statement this morning, Lynn?
Well, he says it most clearly in the letter that's gone to Iona Campanola that he thought that the time was right for him, that it had been one of the joys of his life to be the leader of the party, and that he had made the decision to resign from the leadership, that it was an appropriate time for someone else to assume the challenge, as he said.
Will he hold a news conference later today?
He hasn't asked for one. I can't say for certain, but I don't believe there will be one.
Mr. Lalond said no, he will not hold a news conference today. He'll be hounded by thousands in the corridors of Parliament, won't he?
Well, that's...
When's the convention, Lynn?
There's no word on that. That's a case that the federal organization of the party will have to take care of, and I don't know.
Thank you very much, Lynn, and thanks to Mr. Lalond, too.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And you see, you were right. The Prime Minister was going to do it when you didn't expect it, or the press didn't expect it.
Right, after the break. Well, at least on your $50 extra on the GIS. Would you believe social credit passed it through to the old folks?
Well, I certainly hope so. I was concerned that they have taken steps to reduce or not increase the gain program. But I think they have said they would pass it on. I don't know, Mr. Curtis said it before the budget. I hope they are not going to change their mind.
I checked with Grace McCarthy.
So they were
they're going to pass it on.
Great. And I'm very happy about
and
that.
this is just for the record, I'm overwhelmed by the disappearance of Trudeau because I'm supposed to quit the day he retires. That was the deal we made.
Well, you still have a few months, so that's all right, Jack.
Yeah.
Take it easy.
I can use for you, I'm not retiring. But I want to clear something up for the benefit of lawyers, doctors, Indian chiefs, and those who previously have been unable to incorporate. May doctors, lawyers, accountants now incorporate and get the benefit of the much less the small business tax rate into the corporations than they could before as individuals?
Yes, very definitely. But in terms of taxation, you have to remind that there is not the same advantages as there was before. Because as long as the money stays in the corporation, obviously it's taxed at the lower level of small business corporations. But if you take the money away in form of dividends or whatever, if you're getting the money back to yourself eventually, you're going to have to pay the same level of taxation as if it were your own personal revenue. So there is not the same kind of incentive that there was before to do it just to avoid paying taxes. In the end, you end up paying the taxes.
Yeah, but in the meantime, you have the lesser tax-paid money available for investment in your little corporation, and it puts you in a better position for the future.
Right.
Is that not correct?
That's right.
Now, what have we actually, you know, apart from your work program, we didn't really hold out any carrots at all to the real unemployed. 5,500 construction workers, unionized construction workers, the industry going to hell in a handbasket. There's nothing for them in the job creation programs. These are the $14, $15, $20 an hour people.
Yeah. Well, you have to look at the budget in the light of the previous budget of last April. And I announced a number of programs that are in effect this year. For instance, on the capital recovery projects, over $1.1 billion is going to be spent this year only on those programs that the federal government is doing, that is infrastructure expenditures, ports, harbor facilities, all kinds of things, buildings, etc., which will give work to a number of construction workers. We'll spend over $125 million in this province this year under those programs, and I don't count here the $100 million we have announced for the Coast Guard vessels that are being built at Burrard Yarrows. So we have provided for a large amount of expenditures that are going to create jobs directly.
Well, a couple of last short questions. Mortgage insurance scheme. I notice your bonds ain't going so well at the moment. Your federal government issue, you only sold 2/3 of them, being discounted at $98. Maybe business doesn't have that much faith in you on your incredible debt.
That is not the factor, because we have issued bonds you know, over the last 2 years, and we had some 2 weeks ago that went very well. It is a matter related to expectations, concern as to what will happen with interest rates, particularly in the United States, and in uncertainty in the light of the statements that have been made in Washington the last 2 days, one by that came from the White House to the effect that the president was considering some tax increases in the United States, and then the next day another statement saying that wasn't the case. So there is the situation in Iran, Iraq, which is a cause of uncertainty at the present time. So it is a matter of maybe we have, you know, my officials priced the bond a little bit they shaved it a little bit too close also. But that is not a serious problem.
Anyway, looking at the budget by and large, with the goodies for the middle and upper classes and the extra for the old age pensioners, and your $300 million lolly in these direct job creation program, and your tax implications for business, and your
that's very important.
Yes, yes. And your corporations for professional men. It is an election goodie budget on which you will be required to campaign.
Well, with the announcement of this morning, I don't know, to begin with. Secondly, I was rather amused to see that half of the press said it was an election budget, half of the press said, no, you can't run an election on that budget. So who will be right? We'll see how it goes. I have not another budget up my sleeve. I have come up with what I thought was the right budget for the time.
You don't have another budget up your sleeve, no.
Well, you know, it's enough work. Just out of laziness, I hope I will not have to have another one this year.
Final question. Considering the polls, the incredible lead that Mulroney has, despite Manitoba and these problems, can you win without Trudeau? Can you win with the Prince Charming John Turner, who's been standing in the wing for 7 years, or Chrétien, or McGuigan? I've run out of candidates. Can you win without Trudeau?
I'll quote you what you referred to as a statement by Trudeau. Just watch us.
My thanks to Marc Lalond. Next, Pat Carney, Vancouver Centre, Tory MP, after the break. Pat Carney, Tory MP for Vancouver Centre, is energy critic for the party and waiting in the wings for the victory. She had, as we did in the studio this morning, Trudeau's announcement that he's going to stay as Prime Minister only until a new leader is elected in May or June. Pat Carney, your comment.
Well, it looks like I won, or I'm going to win, the BC caucus $5 pool, because when we all formed a pool to decide the date of the election, I said it would be in November. And if events, you know, flow as they normally would, that would probably be when you would have an election.
Work that out for me. He gets elected, say, May or June. The House doesn't sit in July or August.
Right.
If it's Turner, he'll be kind of acting, it'll be an acting prime minister and he'll be pulling the strings.
Right. But
without a seat.
Yes, he'll be minister in the, prime minister out of the
waiting.
House. No, he'll be prime minister presumably, or leader of the party. I don't know how they'll work that out.
Leader of the federal party.
But he will not be, we'll have a case where the prime minister of the country is not responsible to Parliament, does not have to account for his actions. But I would like to talk a bit about this convention, because as you may remember from all that television, I was co-chairman of our elections committee last year in the Conservative convention. And the first thing I want to point out is it takes time to organize a convention. So if he announces now that he's retiring, there's going to be a big flap. But it takes, 4 months really to organize a proper political convention. There's an incredible amount of work that has to be done.
March, April, May, June.
June, that would make June.
End of June for the convention.
Right. That's because you have to have delegate selection. You have to have people have to announce their leadership, and they usually do that with some fanfare. Then the political party has to pick their delegates, which involves announcements, notices, the organizations of meetings, the selection of delegates. There's an incredible amount of work that has to be done in just setting up the physical site. I mean, planning all the telecommunications, getting the television.
So, say June, for the end of June is the earliest the convention you think would actually take place. Then it's a 50-day call for an election.
Well, no, I don't think that they would go right away for an election, because I think that they would take the opportunity when the House is not sitting to have the new Prime Minister run around the country and announce all the new policies that they're going to do. And then, of course, you have the Pope, and the new Prime Minister will be very visible with the Pope. And then after the Pope goes home, presumably you'll have an election call. But that gives the new leader, up to 3 or 4 months to put a fresh face on events on the same old party.
Is there a statutory limit within which you're not supposed to call an election after the Pope leaves the country?
No, but there is, as we understand, some sort of a understanding with the Vatican that the Pope's visit would not be used for political purposes, and that you're not going to run an election while he's here. Now, you can do a campaigning, you can be, very visible on, particularly with the ethnic communities, who are often largely Catholic. You can have a lot of primetime television with the Pope's visit.
On the news coverage?
Yes, definitely. And I don't know. But the other important thing that it does is that it makes things like Mr. Lalond's budget irrelevant. I mean, if you look at the summary of his major measures, including the one that you were talking about on pensions, everything that he's proposing is just that, a proposal. For instance, you were talking about portable pensions.
Yeah, if.
He says January the 1st, 1987 at the latest. Well, he won't be around in 1987. On increasing deductions for RRSPs, 2 stages, subject to discussion, 1985.
He won't be around.
Yeah, you look at the profit participation plans that he suggested, it's 1985. Changes to small business, 1985. Proposed.
So
introduction of mortgages, these plans to protect people on mortgages, proposed for discussion. So what he's done is bring in a budget with a lot of little goodies that people will unfortunately think they're going to get, and in fact they won't get, because they will not be able to deliver on these promises.
That's a very valid point, especially following Lalonde this morning. In other words, there's going to be an election before any of these pension plans or these iffy provisions to help the doctors, the lawyers, the Indian chiefs, the doctors, the lawyers, the 15,000 into RRSPs, all of these will be on the shelf, and we'll have to depend on the Tories
to take a look at them and
see how many they're going to implement. Offhand, can you tell me how many of these iffy things you would implement?
Well, we'll have to take a look at what these proposals are. I mean, he's brought them forward. Most of them we've been pressing for. I mean, we have been pushing for simplifying the income tax for small businessmen. We brought in the mortgage interest deductibility scheme, which they voted down. It's so ironic that they now want to help mortgage holders. We have the very first measure we ever introduced in the Clark administration was a pension proposal. So, these proposals, which are good and in the national interest, we will be the ones, the party, who will be implementing it. And I think that's sort of ironic. But in terms of Mr. Lalonde's performance on February the 15th and his speeches on what he will do in his budget and how much money he's going to spend and how he's going to cut the deficit is now totally, you know, irrelevant.
Good point. More with Pat Carney and your calls too after the break. Quite seriously, Pat, you're partisan, but you're not that partisan. I would say the Liberal ranks, when Trudeau goes, will be in a shambles with a large number of very not high-caliber people going for the leadership. I mean, my favourite on a personality basis, and he can never win, is Chrétien.
Oh,
you know,
well,
on a personality basis.
I have no favourites in the Liberal race for the leadership, as you can imagine. But what we are going to see, and it's going to be interesting, is we're going to see disarray in the Liberal ranks and a destruction of the myth that the Liberals are disciplined and totally in support of the leader. As Brian Mulroney has said, it's been 16 years since they've had a leadership race. You know, that's almost a generation in terms of the voters. And during that time, the Tories have had several leadership races, and everyone says, oh, the Tories are always split. The Tories
their young, yeah.
Disarray. Well, as Brian says, they ain't seen nothing till they see a Liberal leadership race where there's going to be backbiting and knifing and you know, statements made and you know, a lot of all the posturing that accompanies a leadership campaign. So that myth is going to be destroyed. At the same time, it gives us a chance to really roll with our campaign machinery.
The guys at McGuigan really think they can go for the leadership of the party? Or don't they know anything about the country?
Well, even more surprising are people like John Roberts, who John Crosby calls the Minister of Oink Oink because of his incredible pork barreling on...
Oink Oink,
yes, on borrowed funds. I mean, we've been raising a lot of commotion in the House on this Special Employment Initiative funds, which Mr. Lalond is too embarrassed to deal with. But basically, it's $180 million, 90% of which have gone to Liberal ridings. And, you know, as Jim McGraw, our critic, has said, we asked for the criteria of how to apply for the funds. Back in November, we got the criteria in February. By that time, all but about $12 million of these funds have been spent, and all in Liberal ridings.
I've got a depressing thought. Maybe you can buy the people of Canada with Oink Oink funds.
Well,
maybe you can. Oink Oink.
Now, there was a good question raised in the House, and I have brought answered with me, where Albert Cooper, who's a backbench Tory MP from Peace River, asked in the House last week, he said, can the minister stand up in this House and say with a straight face that 95.7% of the most urgent needs of Canada Post could only be found in Liberal ridings?
Why Canada Post?
Canada Post, because they had some money under that program. Central Mortgage and Housing.
Oh, 95% of all the Canada Post money went into Liberal ridings.
Under this special, under this program. There's another one from Doug Lewis of Simcoe North. He says, why was 90% of Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation funding under this slush fund spent in Liberal ridings? 90%. I mean, John Crosby, you know, who coined the phrase the Minister for Oink Oink, pointed out that in Newfoundland, which is a, you know, heavily dependent on fisheries, he said, how come under the Special Employment Initiatives Program, 4.6 million was spent in Newfoundland under fisheries ocean to date, 100% in Liberal ridings. He says, not 1 cent, not one jot was spent in either St. John's East or St. John's West, which of course is the capital of Newfoundland. Not 1 cent of those funds went to the 2 Tory ridings. In Prince Edward Island, Tom McMillan, who's our Deputy House Leader, points out that under this program, the 2 Liberal ridings held in Prince Edward Island received $2.4 million. And it's a little island, you know.
I know.
By contrast, the 2 Progressive Conservative ridings got 2,100. In other words, it was 11-1 in Prince Edward Islands for the Liberal ridings.
So this is the incredible gall and arrogance of an established government 16 years of power.
Well, and the man who did that, John Roberts, is one of the people who actually thinks that he can run for leader of the party.
Minister of Oink Oink.
And Minister of Oink Oink. It's just incredible. We spent 2 days, I asked in the House, for instance, how come BC, with 13.7% unemployment, got 5% of these funds?
That's what I said. Lalond denied that.
No, they look at the overall funding under the department and they say, but this is a special
special fund.
This was a political...
What did you get in Vancouver Centre?
Nothing. I went to my bureaucrats who are terrific and work enormously hard for our ridings, and said, you know, what does Centre get out of these funds? And our bureaucrats in employment and immigration work very hard for Centre, and they get all the funds they can, you know, for us. And they told me nothing. Vancouver Centre had no allocation specifically that they knew of.
Austin decided where the money was going, didn't he?
Yes. Now, BC got some money under it, and I brought the list, which is...
$5 million.
Yeah.
It was in the paper. A couple of community centres here and there.
Yes, and the pavilion.
Old folks' home or
that
something.
Austin announced. There were a couple of minor projects that are called Vancouver Centre, but didn't come through my office, or I didn't know about it. So they're entering this election with two little pork barreling attempts. One is this sleazy slush fund, as I called it in the House.
Right.
And the second, and the most serious for Canadians, is that they have exhausted our country's ability to finance new programs for the next 5 years. They have borrowed so much money. It's like somebody who takes their Chargex and their MasterCard and their Eaton's account and spends all the limit and then says, okay, you can have it, you know, there's no more...
Didn't Crosby say something kind of tricky which might embarrass you about we might have to cut some social services to help balance or get the budget to in a better, healthier state? Didn't Crosby
I heard that,
say
but
that?
I don't understand why he would, in fact, say that, because it has been a policy of our party, you know, agreed in caucus and confirmed by all of us that we would not touch universality. And also, Brian Mulroney has 3 economic advisors in his caucus, 3 MPs. We have an economic advisory council to Mulroney. We met 2 weeks ago, and the advisors are Mike Wilson, myself, and John Crosby. And we have never discussed that. And we're the 3 people who, along with 3 private sector economists, are the ones who are advising.
Are you solid behind Mulroney except for the 5 Tory MPs who absented themselves from the vote on the Manitoba language crisis?
Absolutely, we are. Brian Mulroney said that that's a mortgage due, and that you know, we had to have caucus solidarity on that. That was his position, and that anybody who didn't want to back the caucus position didn't have to sit in the Conservative caucus. Now, Brian has a unsuspected ability to kneecap people who do not go along with what the caucus position is and do not back the position that he takes.
Does that mean these 5 Tories from Manitoba will not sit in the caucus?
I'm going to be very interested to see what happens to them, because he made it very clear that, you know, if you don't back caucus, you're out of the game.
More with Pat Carney and your calls after the break.
Just one final question. When will it all be over in your informed information?
Jack, I'll make a deal.
Okay.
You and I retire together, okay? When you get out of this game, I'll get out.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Tomorrow? Pat Carney, could you please deliver for me your epitaph for Trudeau?
I would say that he will be remembered as the man who broke the country in more ways than one. He left it in financial dire straits. It'll take us years to dig ourselves out of the debt that he left us. And he broke the country's spirit, in a way, by killing off a lot of that initiative that Canadians have, their faith in their future and their sense of security. So, and also I think he has divided the country in the implementation of some of his language policies. So in balance, remember how they said in the last campaign, Ronald Reagan, you know, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? We're going to ask, you know, are we better off than we were under Pierre Trudeau 16 years ago? And the answer will be no.
Well put. Now, you've got a hit list of 3,500 civil audit and councils. You're going to go chop chop because you muffed it the last time and didn't make any major appointments except a couple to the Senate. I'm presuming you're going to win. Who knows?
We don't have a hit list. What we have is a list of those orders in council where we can replace Liberal appointees with Tory appointees. It's going to be hard in some cases because in the instance of course of Mrs. Keith Davies, she has a 21-year appointment.
To the Immigration Appeal Board?
Yeah, 21 year. And I think now you're going to find a lot of Liberal MPs bailing out into Liberal appointments. And it's going to be interesting to see how many Liberals are placed in some of these Order in Council appointments in the next few months. So we have a very simple job to do. If we are going to have our Conservative policies implemented, you know, actually carried out, we're going to have people in place, whether they're Conservatives or whether they're non-political or whatever, who we trust that when a minister says, you know, it is our policy to do this with the CBC, or it's our policy to do that with the Harbours Commission, or that with, you know, the Wheat Board or whatever, that Conservative policies are carried out. So we're compiling a list of Tories with expertise, with some knowledge of those areas, who, as the appointments come up, we can put in place. Some of those appointments are at pleasure. You know, a new Conservative Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, can say, well, at pleasure means that we're terminating your position.
At our pleasure.
At our pleasure. Other appointments that have some tenure, you know, like
contracts.
The Governor of the Bank of Canada. The most difficult ones are going to be the case of people like Joel Bell, you know, that person who has, it's hard to find a word for Joel Bell, you know, the man who, under Senator Austin, wrote off $1 billion under Canadair, but is president of, you know, many of these major crown corporations.
And is now a senator?
Not Joel Bell.
Oh, no, I'm thinking of Michael Kirby.
You're thinking of Michael Kirby.
Pitfield and Kirby from the PM.
Right.
Oh, PCO, whatever
Yeah,
it was.
PMO.
They went straight into the Senate, both of
Right.
them. You can't touch them. You'll have to wipe out the Senate to get into the Liberal hack.
No, and we can't touch, you know, Ann Cools, the person who got to the Senate by blowing up a computer center with a, you know, and has a criminal record. We
She
can
didn't
do
blow it up. I always have to correct people. She was convicted and did 4 months for obstruction.
Well, we cannot do anything about that, but we will be.
You can wipe out the Senate.
Replacing. Well,
but you need the Senate for your hacks.
Well, I don't know. They're full of Liberal hacks at the moment.
Oh,
and
agreed.
It'll be quite some time before they all retire.
13 vacancies.
Yeah, but nobody who is, Brian has made a point of this, no responsible person who is, you know, will carry out policy will be replaced. We don't want a repeat of what happened under the Clark administration, where the Liberals said, well, you may be in power, but we are still governing because we control the levers of government. And, you know, we want to make sure that the levers of government are in the hands of the Conservative Party and the Conservative government.
Is there not a danger that with Mulroney still untested on policies, you must concede,
No,
generally untested in policies, let me finish, is not going to face the election until after John Turner, the man who danced with Princess Margaret, comes out of the wings, having been 7 years or 8 years in seclusion? Is Mulroney not facing a chance that the Libs might come back? They might create a whole new Quebec crisis with the Manitoba language? You know that?
Well, they can't very well do that in Quebec and the Manitoba language, because Brian has been very much on side. I mean, he has diffused that opportunity to use that issue against us in Quebec because he has been a party to the House resolution.
But they might push him still further with a more specific resolution for the province of Manitoba.
You'll have a hard time pushing Brian Mulroney too hard on language rights. You know, that is an issue that he feels very strongly about as, you know, an Irish Canadian from Quebec.
Catholic, too.
Yes, and a Catholic. So that has boomeranged. Trying to make an election issue out of Medicare has boomeranged because...
Could you back the Canada Health Act?
We have said that, you know, Medicare is a sacred trust. You know, we have suggestions to improve it in many ways, but it is a sacred trust. So if they go to an election, they're not going to have an issue. We backed the peace initiative. They're not going to have an issue, and we'll make it the economy, because things are not as rosy out there as a lot of people in BC who cannot get jobs know, and we'll be, you know, targeting on that.
Things in BC are appalling at the moment.
They are appalling, and I was at an OECD meeting recently in Paris, and the outlook is not that good, you know, for the next 18 months. It's an anemic recovery. So
are you all set for an election, no matter when they call it?
Yes, we have spent months under...
Are they thinking of running Art Phillips against you or anybody of that caliber?
I'm sure Art has much too much sense to do that. We have been meeting for the last few months in very intensive envelope sessions where each of the critics has had a responsibility to look at their departments, look at the spending, suggest changes that have to be made, suggest budget cuts, suggest new initiatives, and though that package will, oddly enough, because of the timing, be ready in early April when it will be taken to a special caucus. So we are ready for an election, and we have our policies, you know, thought through, costed out, and ready to present in an election.
Oh, by the way, we're going to have I don't need to say that. I'll say that. Yes, a news special at 11 o'clock this morning, which I think indicates the presence live of Pierre Elliott Trudeau and Iona Campagnolo at 11. So might be a little before then, so don't go away. A couple of calls, Pat? You like to take a couple of calls?
If we have time.
Carney and I used to be journalistic colleagues together, these many years ago in the Vancouver Centre. We actually did work together at one time. Were you in the province?
I was in the province when you were in the Sun. But you were a role model anyway, Jack.
I was a role model.
Yeah.
I hope I was a good role model. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Webster.
Yes, madam.
Just listen to Pat Carney's pathetic answer to your questions about Crosby's latest statements. Oh, I don't know how John Crosby could say that social programs will be cut and taxes will be going up and no policies until elected. And Mulroney will kneecap members who do not support the caucus. Well, what about this pompous, puffy-cheeked, pusillanimous
that's not
pusillanimous pussyfooter. And by the way, she says that Lalonde won't be around. You know, you should have asked Lalonde the question. He said that he would not seek the leadership. But you never asked him the question, would he accept the draft if it was recommended by the Prime Minister?
I know the answer, he would not.
Well,
that guy has phoned me 4 or 5 times, uses the same phrase. He is now officially asked to retire from the arena.
Okay, well, it just shows that the Liberal campaign for leadership has already started. But I'm not running. There's no point in attacking me.
Why not?
Because I'm a Conservative.
Oh, that's right.
Okay.
I thought Flora was great in the House.
Oh, good. She's usually great in the House.
Hello?
Wonderful woman.
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yeah.
Jack.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask Pat a question.
Yeah.
You know, doggone it, this economy in this country of ours could get going if we just let us Canadians get busy at it, take the interest, let us deduct the interest we pay on all our consumer goods. We'll build houses, we'll buy cars, we'll buy boats, we'll buy everything and look after our own economy. Why keep giving us our own tax money back? Give us our deduction, our interest rates, and we'll make the economy go, especially in this province. What do you think, Pat? I'm going to hang up and listen to your comment.
Go on, you've short comment.
We can't deduct all interest rates from taxes because that would have too bad a fiscal effect. But we did propose mortgage interest deductibility, and that is the one which a lot of people felt the need for when interest rates rose again. So I couldn't agree with you more that what we have to do is to take the wraps off individual Canadians and let us control our own economic destiny.
My thanks to Pat Carney. I'll be back after the break. Trudeau announced he's quitting this morning. Believe it or believe it not, yes, he's going. And there will be a CTV news special with Trudeau and company at 11 a.m. this morning, so don't go away. Tomorrow morning, I don't know what I'm going to do yet. We'll have to see what happens today. My thanks again to Patricia Carney. News special at 11 a.m. Stay tuned or I'll cut your throat after the break.
As to whether I'll rate, as you say, a footnote in history, I don't know. It'll depend on who writes the history, I guess.
When are you retiring?
When?
When? Lalonde on Trudeau quitting on check at midnight. Lalonde on Trudeau quitting on check with Webster at midnight.